My name is Jessica and I'm 28 years old. For 15 years, I've been the family's financial backbone, paying for everything from my parents' mortgage to my brother's college tuition. I worked 2 jobs while studying, never complained, and always put family first. But when I finally needed help during my own crisis, my parents not only refused, they cut me off completely and told me I was selfish for even asking. What they didn't know was that I had been keeping detailed records of every single payment I'd made to them over the years. And I was about to use those records in a way that would change everything forever. I have a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. This is about the day I discovered that 15 years of sacrifice meant absolutely nothing to the people I loved most. It started when I was 13 years old. My dad lost his job at the manufacturing plant and my mom was working part-time at a grocery store. Money was tight, but I was just a kid. I didn't really understand what that meant yet. What I did understand was that my parents were stressed, arguing more, and my little brother Marcus was asking why we couldn't go to McDonald's anymore. I was always good with numbers. While other kids were playing video games, I was helping my mom balance the checkbook and figuring out which bills we could pay late without getting shut off. By the time I was 15, I had my first job at a local diner, washing dishes after school and on weekends. Every paycheck, I handed over half to my parents without them even asking. It just felt natural. We were a family, and families help each other. Marcus was different. He was the baby, 5 years younger than me, and he had this charm that made everyone want to protect him. While I was scrubbing plates covered in dried ketchup, Marcus was playing soccer and getting driven to practice by our mom. While I was doing homework at midnight after my shift, Marcus was watching TV and complaining about being bored. But I didn't mind. I really didn't. I loved my family and I was proud that I could help. When my parents smiled at me and called me their responsible one, their little hero, it made every blister on my hands worth it. By the time I graduated high school, I was working 30 hours a week and had saved enough to pay for my first semester of community college. My parents were so proud. They threw me a small party with a grocery store cake and told everyone how mature and independent I was. Marcus, meanwhile, was failing 3 classes and spent most of his time playing video games. College was tough. I was taking 18 credit hours and working 2 jobs, the diner and a weekend cleaning job at an office building. I'd get home at 2 a.m., study until 4, sleep for 3 hours, then get up for my 8 a.m. statistics class. But I was making it work. I was even managing to send money home every month. That's when my parents sat me down and explained that Marcus needed help. He'd been accepted to State University, but they couldn't afford the tuition. They wondered if I could help out just until Dad found better work. They promised they'd pay me back. I was exhausted, barely scraping by, but I said yes. I always said yes. I took out additional student loans and worked extra shifts. I sent them $1,200 a month for Marcus's school, plus another $500 for household expenses. I was living on ramen noodles and generic cereal, but Marcus was getting the full college experience. The pattern continued for years. Every time I thought I might finally have a break, there was another crisis. Dad's car broke down. Could I help with repairs? Mom needed dental work. Could I cover the copay? Marcus wanted to study abroad. Could I pitch in for his trip to Europe? I transferred to a 4-year university and somehow managed to graduate with a business degree. I found a decent job at an accounting firm, making $45,000 a year. For the first time in my life, I thought I might actually be able to build some savings. But my parents' needs seemed to grow along with my income. The monthly payments I was making to them increased from $800 to $1,200 to $1,500. I was covering their mortgage, their car payments, their insurance. I was essentially supporting a family of 3 while trying to survive on my own. Marcus graduated and moved back home. I thought maybe he'd get a job and help out, but he decided he wanted to pursue his passion, which apparently involved playing guitar and posting videos online. My parents supported his decision completely. They said he was finding himself and shouldn't be pressured into just any job. Meanwhile, I was working 50-hour weeks and spending my weekends doing freelance bookkeeping, just to keep up with everyone's expectations. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 6 years. I was driving a 12-year-old car that needed constant repairs. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with paper-thin walls and a heater that barely worked. But I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that eventually, things would get better, and my family would remember everything I'd done for them. I told myself that love meant sacrifice, and this was just what families did for each other. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. Last December, everything changed. I was at work, reviewing quarterly reports, when I got a call from my landlord. He was apologetic but firm my rent was going up by $400 a month starting in January. The neighborhood was gentrifying, property values were rising, and he couldn't afford to keep my rent at the current rate. I sat in my cubicle, staring at the numbers on my computer screen, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: panic. With what I was already paying my parents, I couldn't afford the increase. I'd been living paycheck to paycheck for so long that I had almost nothing in savings. That night, I called my parents. I explained the situation calmly, rationally. I told them I'd been supporting them for 15 years, that I'd never asked for anything back, but now I really needed help. Could they possibly reduce what I was paying them by a few $100s a month, just until I figured out my housing situation? The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Finally, my mom spoke. "Jessica, honey, you know we depend on that money. We've built our budget around it. We can't just change everything because you're having problems." "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I've given you over $100,000 in the past 15 years. I'm not asking you to pay me back. I'm just asking for a temporary reduction so I don't become homeless." "Don't be dramatic," my dad's voice cut in. He picked up the extension. "You're a smart girl. You'll figure something out. Maybe get a roommate or find a cheaper place." "I've looked," I said. "Everything in my price range is either unsafe or would triple my commute. I'm already working as much as I can. I just need a little breathing room." "Well, we can't help you," my mom said. "We have our own expenses. Marcus is looking into graduate school and we need to make sure we can support him." I felt like I'd been slapped. Graduate school? He's been home for 2 years doing nothing but playing music. "He's exploring his options," my dad said defensively. "Not everyone needs to rush into the workforce like you did. Some people need time to find their path." "What about my path?" I asked, and I could hear my voice starting to crack. "What about my dreams? I've been working since I was 15 to support this family. When do I get to explore my options?" "You're being selfish," my mom said quietly. "We raised you better than this. Family comes first, Jessica. You've always known that." "Selfish?" The word hit me like a physical blow. After 15 years of giving everything I had, of putting my family's needs above my own every single time, I was being called selfish for asking for help. "I need to go," I said, and hung up before they could respond. I spent that night on my couch, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had just happened. I thought about all the times I'd chosen work over social events, all the opportunities I'd missed, all the relationships that had ended because I was too exhausted or too broke to invest in them. I thought about Marcus, who'd never had a real job, who'd never worried about paying rent or buying groceries or keeping the lights on. I thought about my parents, who'd built their entire lifestyle around my contributions and now couldn't even consider reducing them to help me avoid homelessness. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I'd never done unless I was actually dying. I drove to my parents' house, thinking maybe we could talk it through face to face, maybe find a compromise. I found Marcus in the living room, playing his guitar. He looked up when I came in, and I noticed something that made my stomach drop. He was wearing a brand new leather jacket, the kind that costs at least $300. "Nice jacket," I said. He grinned. "Yeah, Mom and Dad got it for me as an early Christmas present." "Pretty cool, right?" My parents appeared from the kitchen, and I could see the guilt in their eyes when they looked at me. But there was something else there too, defiance. "We need to talk," I said. "Jessica, we've already discussed this," my mom said. "We can't change our financial situation just because you're having problems." "But you can buy Marcus a $300 jacket?" "That's different," my dad said. "That was a gift. We're allowed to spend our own money how we want." "Your own money?" I felt something snap inside me. "Half of that money comes from me." I've been paying your mortgage, your car payments, your insurance for 15 years. And we've been grateful, my mom said. But you chose to help us. No one forced you. I was 13 when this started. I was a child who wanted to help her family. And now you're an adult who should understand that we have commitments, my dad said. We can't just stop living our lives because you made poor financial decisions. Poor financial decisions. I stared at them, these people who'd raised me, who'd taught me about loyalty and sacrifice and putting family first. They were looking at me like I was a stranger asking for handouts. Get out, my mom said quietly when I didn't respond. I think you need to go home and think about what kind of person you want to be. I left without another word. But as I drove away, I realized something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in my adult life, I was seeing my family clearly. And what I saw made me sick. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the conversation with my parents, their words echoing in my head like accusations. Selfish. Poor financial decisions. We can't just stop living our lives. At 3 a.m., I got up and opened my laptop. If I was going to figure out my next move, I needed to understand exactly where I stood financially. I'd been so focused on just surviving month to month that I'd never really calculated the full scope of what I'd been giving them. I started pulling up old bank statements, going back year by year. Direct deposits to my parents' account. Checks written for Marcus's tuition. Payments to their mortgage company that I'd made directly. Emergency transfers for car repairs, medical bills, home maintenance. As the numbers added up on my spreadsheet, I felt physically ill. Over 15 years, I had given my family $127,000. $127,000. That was more than twice my current annual salary. If I had invested that money instead, even conservatively, I would have had enough for a down payment on a house. I could have been building equity instead of living in a studio apartment with a broken heater. I could have had a real emergency fund instead of panicking over a rent increase. But the financial calculation wasn't the worst part. The worst part was going through my old journals and calendars, seeing all the things I'd missed. My friend Katie's wedding, I'd been working double shifts to send Marcus money for textbooks. My college roommate's birthday party, I'd been at the diner, earning money for my parents' car payment. 3 different job opportunities that I turned down because they would have required me to relocate, and I couldn't abandon my family. I'd built my entire adult life around supporting them. And the moment I needed support in return, they'd call me selfish and kicked me out. That's when I found the Facebook posts. I'd been too busy working to spend much time on social media, but I logged into my account and started scrolling through my family's posts. What I saw made my blood run cold. 3 weeks ago, my mom had posted photos from a weekend trip to Napa Valley. She and my dad were at a wine tasting, smiling and holding glasses of expensive wine. The caption read, "Finally treating ourselves to a little luxury. Life is too short not to enjoy the good things." 2 weeks ago, Marcus had posted a picture of himself at an expensive restaurant downtown. He was holding a massive steak and grinning at the camera, celebrating my acceptance to grad school with the best meal of my life. Grad school. He'd been accepted to grad school and hadn't even told me. But he'd told our parents, and apparently they'd celebrate it by taking him out for a $200 dinner. I scrolled further back. Pictures of Marcus at concerts, at bars, at sporting events. Always with friends, always looking happy and carefree. Never worried about money, never stressed about bills, never choosing between groceries and gas money. Pictures of my parents at neighborhood barbecues, at family friends' parties, at my mom's book club meetings. Always well-dressed, always smiling, always looking like they didn't have a care in the world. And then there were the posts about me. Or rather, the complete absence of posts about me. I was virtually invisible in my family's social media presence. No mentions of my promotions at work, no celebration of my college graduation, no acknowledgement of my birthday most years. I was good enough to fund their lifestyle, but not good enough to be part of it. I kept digging, going through old photos and posts, and I found something that made me stop breathing. A post from my dad, dated 6 months ago in response to a friend's comment about how expensive everything was getting. "We're lucky that our daughter helps us out," he'd written. "She's got a good job and doesn't have kids or a mortgage to worry about, so she can afford to share." Some people are just better at managing money than others. He'd made it sound like I was wealthy, like I was casually throwing money at them because I had so much I didn't know what to do with it. He'd completely ignored the fact that I didn't have kids or a mortgage precisely because I couldn't afford them while supporting his family. I screenshot everything. Every post, every comment, every photo that showed how they were spending the money I was giving them. And then I started looking at their public records. Property tax records showed that their house was worth significantly more than when they'd bought it. If they sold it, they'd have enough to pay off their mortgage and still have a substantial nest egg. But why would they sell when they had me paying their mortgage for them? I found business registration documents showing that Marcus had actually started an LLC for his music 6 months ago. He wasn't just exploring his options. He was running a business. A business that, according to his social media posts, was starting to book paid gigs. My parents had been lying to me. They'd been presenting themselves as barely scraping by while living off my contributions, but they were actually doing fine. They were taking vacations, eating at expensive restaurants, buying luxury items, and helping Marcus start his business. I wasn't supporting a struggling family. I was funding a comfortable lifestyle for people who saw me as a walking ATM. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The hurt was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to put myself first. And I was going to make sure my family understood exactly what they were losing. I called in sick to work again. I needed time to think, to plan, and to prepare for what I was about to do. This wasn't going to be some impulsive emotional outburst. It was going to be calculated, thorough, and devastating. First, I created a comprehensive financial spreadsheet. Every payment, every transfer, every check I'd written to my family over the past 15 years. I included screenshots of my bank statements, copies of canceled checks, and receipts for everything I could find. The total came to $127,439. But that wasn't the whole story. I calculated the opportunity cost, what that money could have earned if I'd invested it conservatively in index funds. With compound interest, that money would have grown to over $200,000. I also calculated how much I could have saved on rent if I'd been able to buy a house 5 years ago when I first qualified for a mortgage. The real cost of supporting my family wasn't just $127,000. It was my entire financial future. Next, I documented their lies. I printed out every social media post that contradicted their claims of financial hardship. I found the business registration for Marcus's LLC and printed that too. I looked up property values in their neighborhood and calculated their home equity. I even found the restaurant receipts from their celebration dinner. Marcus had posted a photo of the receipt on Instagram, apparently proud of how much they'd spent. I created a timeline showing how their spending had increased as my income grew. When I got my first real job, they'd started taking vacations. When I got my promotion, they bought a new car. When I got my biggest raise, Marcus had started exploring graduate school. But the most damaging evidence was in their own words. I compiled every text message, email, and social media comment where they discussed their financial situation. The contradictions were staggering. They told me they were struggling to pay bills while posting on Facebook about their wine cellar renovation. They'd claimed they couldn't afford Marcus's car insurance while he was posting pictures of his weekend trips to the coast. I also started researching their legal obligations. I'd been making direct payments to their mortgage company for 3 years, payments that had been credited to their account. I'd been paying their car insurance directly for 2 years. I'd been listed as an authorized user on several of their accounts. What I discovered was that I had more power than I'd realized. I wasn't just a family member giving gifts. I was a financial contributor with documented proof of my contributions. And I had the right to stop those contributions at any time. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in family financial disputes. I wanted to make sure I understood my rights and obligations before I made any moves. The consultation was eye-opening. You have no legal obligation to support your parents, the lawyer told me. And based on what you've shown me, you have grounds for a civil suit if you wanted to pursue recovery of these funds. I wasn't interested in suing them, I just wanted to make sure I could cleanly disengage without legal repercussions. The lawyer helped me draft formal notices to their mortgage company and insurance providers, informing them that I would no longer be making payments on their behalf. I also opened a new bank account at a different bank and started the process of redirecting my paychecks. If I was going to cut financial ties, I needed to make sure they couldn't access any of my accounts. The hardest part was figuring out how to handle the emotional side of this. I'd been the family's rock for so long that I'd forgotten how to be anything else. I'd built my entire identity around being helpful, responsible, and selfless. Who was I if I wasn't taking care of everyone else? I started seeing a therapist. I'd never been able to afford therapy before. Guess where my mental health budget had been going, but now I realized I needed professional help to work through this. You've been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to your usefulness, she told me during our second session. Your family has trained you to be a provider, not a person. Breaking free from that pattern is going to feel like losing yourself, but you're not losing yourself, you're finding yourself. I started writing a letter to my family. Not an angry rant, but a clear, factual explanation of what was going to change and why. I wanted them to understand that this wasn't a tantrum or a negotiation, it was a decision. I wrote draft after draft, trying to find the right tone. I wanted to be firm but not cruel, clear but not vindictive. I wanted them to understand the full scope of what I'd given up for them without making it sound like I was trying to guilt them. The final version was 3 pages long. It detailed my financial contributions, their deception, and my decision to stop supporting them. I explained that I'd given them 15 years of my life and over $127,000 of my money, and in return, they'd called me selfish for asking for help when I needed it. I ended the letter with a paragraph that I'd rewritten 20 times. I love you all, but I can't continue to fund a lifestyle that I can't afford for myself. I need to build my own life, save for my own future, and learn to put my own needs first. This isn't about punishment or revenge, it's about self-preservation. I hope someday you'll understand that I'm doing this because I finally love myself enough to stop accepting less than I deserve. I sealed the letter in an envelope and put it on my kitchen counter. I wasn't ready to send it yet, but I was getting close. I had one more thing to do before I could move forward. I needed to find out exactly how much they'd been lying to me about their financial situation. And I had an idea about how to do that. It was time to pay my family one last visit. I showed up at my parents' house on Sunday afternoon unannounced. I'd been planning this moment for weeks and I wanted to catch them off guard. I needed to see their real reaction when confronted with the truth. Marcus answered the door, still in pajamas at 2 p.m. Behind him, I could see my parents sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and their laptop. "Hey Jess," Marcus said, seeming genuinely happy to see me. "Mom, Dad, Jessica's here." My parents looked up from their paperwork and I could see immediate tension in their faces. We hadn't spoken since our fight 2 weeks ago and I could tell they were expecting another emotional confrontation. "Can we talk?" I said, walking into the kitchen without waiting for an invitation. "Of course, honey," my mom said, quickly shuffling the papers into a pile. But not before I saw what they were: graduate school applications and financial aid forms. "What's all this?" I asked, nodding toward the papers. "Just some forms for Marcus's grad school applications," my dad said. "Nothing urgent." "Grad school," I repeated. "The same grad school that you're planning to ask me to help pay for?" The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged a look and Marcus suddenly seemed very interested in his phone. "We hadn't discussed the financial aspects yet," my mom said carefully. "Right," I said. "Just like you hadn't discussed the Napa Valley trip, or the expensive dinners, or Marcus's new business." Marcus looked up sharply. "How did you know about the LLC?" "Because I did my homework," I said, pulling out my phone. "Just like I did homework on your parents' property values, your social media posts, and your actual financial situation." I set a folder on the table, copies of everything I'd compiled over the past 2 weeks. "What is this?" my dad asked. "It's a complete record of every dollar I've given this family over the past 15 years, I said. "It's also documentation of how you've been spending that money while lying to me about your financial situation." My mom picked up the top sheet, a summary of their social media posts with screenshots. Her face went pale. "Jessica, this isn't what it looks like," she started. It's exactly what it looks like, I said. For 15 years, I've been supporting this family under the impression that you were struggling financially. I've lived in poverty so you could live comfortably. I've given up opportunities, relationships, and my own financial security to keep you afloat. We never asked you to sacrifice your own happiness, my dad said defensively. Didn't you? I pulled out another sheet. Here's a text from you, Dad, from last year. Jess, I know you're working hard, but we really can't make the mortgage payment this month without your help. We might lose the house. But here's a Facebook post from the same week showing the new furniture you bought for the living room. I watched as the color drained from his face. And here's one from you, Mom. Honey, I know money's tight for everyone, but Marcus really needs help with his car payment or he might lose his job. Except Marcus doesn't have a job. He never has. And that same week, you posted pictures from your spa day with your sister. My mom's hands were shaking as she looked through the papers. I can explain all of this, she said. I'm sure you can, I said. But I'm not here for explanations. I'm here to tell you that I'm done. Done with what? Marcus asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. Done being your ATM. Done funding your lifestyle. Done sacrificing my future for people who see me as a paycheck instead of a person. That's not fair, my dad said, standing up. Your family. We love you. Do you? I asked. Because people who love me wouldn't call me selfish for asking for help after 15 years of giving. People who love me wouldn't lie to me about their financial situation while I'm eating ramen noodles so I can afford to pay their bills. We've been grateful, my mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes. We've always appreciated everything you've done. Have you? I pulled out another sheet. Here's a comment you made on Facebook, Mom. Your friend asked how you could afford to redecorate your kitchen and you said, we're just good at budgeting. No mention of the fact that I've been paying your mortgage for 3 years. And here's one from you, Dad. Your coworker asked about your new car and you said you've been saving up. But I paid for that car. I have the bank transfer records right here. I could see the panic setting in. They were realizing that I had documented everything, that their lies were all laid out in black and white. What do you want? My dad asked quietly. I want you to understand what you're losing, I said. Not just the money, though that's $1,500 a month you're about to lose. I want you to understand that you're losing your daughter. Don't be dramatic, my mom said, but her voice was weak. Dramatic? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've been paying your bills for 15 years while living in a studio apartment with a broken heater. I've never taken a real vacation, never bought myself anything nice, never even gone out to dinner without calculating whether I could afford it. And when I finally asked for help, not money, just a temporary reduction in what I was giving you, you called me selfish and threw me out. We were just surprised, my dad said. We didn't know you were struggling. You didn't know I was struggling? I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of my apartment. This is where I live. This is what I can afford after giving you $127,000 over 15 years. And you didn't know I was struggling. Marcus was staring at the floor. My parents were looking at each other with expressions I'd never seen before, fear mixed with shame. We can work this out, my mom said desperately. We can figure out a new arrangement. No, I said firmly. We can't. Because this isn't about money anymore. This is about respect. This is about you seeing me as a person instead of a resource. I stood up and gathered my papers. I've already contacted your mortgage company and insurance providers. As of next month, I'll no longer be making payments on your behalf. I've closed our joint accounts and opened new ones. I've changed my address with my bank and my employer. Jessica, please, my mom said, reaching for my hand. We can talk about this. We can make changes. I pulled my hand away. You had 15 years to make changes. You had 15 years to see me as more than a paycheck. You had 15 years to consider my needs along with everyone else's. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Marcus, your parents can afford to pay for your graduate school. They have over $150,000 in home equity and no debts except their mortgage. They don't need my help. They just prefer to spend their money on other things and use mine for necessities. Mom, is that true? Marcus asked, looking between our parents. It's complicated, my dad said. No, it's not, I said. They chose to let me struggle so they could live comfortably. And when I finally stood up for myself, they called me selfish. I opened the front door. "Goodbye," I said. "Don't contact me unless you're ready to apologize and acknowledge what you've done. And don't expect that apology to come with a checkbook." I walked to my car while they called after me, their voices desperate and panicked. But I didn't look back. For the first time in 15 years, I was putting myself first. And it felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The first month was the hardest. My phone rang constantly, my parents calling, texting, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to angry to desperate. Marcus sent me long messages trying to explain that he didn't know how much I'd been sacrificing, that he thought our parents were just good with money. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life. With an extra $1,500 a month in my budget, I could finally afford a decent apartment. I found a one-bedroom place with working heat, a dishwasher, and a view of the park. It felt like a mansion after years in that studio. I also did something I'd never been able to do before. I made a budget for myself. Not for my family, not for emergencies, but for my own wants and needs. I budgeted for new clothes, for restaurants, for a real vacation. I even budgeted for therapy, which I was going to need to work through 15 years of conditioning. 3 weeks after our confrontation, I got a call from my cousin Sarah. She was my mom's niece, and we'd been close when we were kids but had drifted apart as I became consumed with work and family obligations. "I heard about what happened," she said without preamble when I answered the phone. "I want you to know that I think you did the right thing." I was surprised. I'd expected judgment from extended family, not support. "My mom told me some of the story," Sarah continued. "She said your parents were devastated that you cut them off, but when she pressed for details, the truth came out. They admitted they'd been living off your contributions for years while building up their own savings." "They have savings?" I asked. "According to my mom, they have almost $80,000 in various accounts. They've been using your money for daily expenses while putting their own income into savings and investments." The betrayal hit me all over again. They hadn't just been lying about their spending, they'd been lying about their entire financial situation. They had been building wealth while I struggled to survive. "There's more," Sarah said. "Marcus called my mom crying, saying he didn't know how he was going to pay for grad school. When she asked why your parents couldn't help, he said they told him they were broke. But then he found out about their savings, and he's furious with them too." I felt a complicated mix of emotions. I was glad Marcus was finally seeing the truth, but I also felt guilty that he was caught in the middle of this. "He's been asking around the family, trying to understand why they lied to him too," Sarah continued. "Apparently, they'd been telling everyone different stories about their finances depending on what they needed at the time." Over the next few weeks, I learned more about how deep their deception had gone. They told my aunt that they were barely scraping by, but they told my uncle that they were doing well enough to help him with a loan. They told their neighbors that they were struggling with the mortgage, but they told their friends that they were considering buying a vacation home. They'd been playing different roles with different people, always positioning themselves to get the maximum benefit from each relationship. I wasn't their only victim, I was just their biggest one. The consequences of their lies were starting to catch up with them. Without my $1,500 monthly contribution, they couldn't maintain their lifestyle. They had to sell the new car and buy a used one. They had to cancel their wine club membership and their premium cable package. They had to actually use their savings for living expenses instead of treating it as untouchable retirement money. Marcus moved out and got a job, a real job, not just his music gigs. He found a small apartment and started paying his own bills for the first time in his adult life. According to Sarah, he was angry with our parents for lying to him about their financial situation and making him feel guilty for not contributing to household expenses. My parents, meanwhile, were facing the reality of their actual financial situation. They could afford their lifestyle, but they'd have to dip into their savings to do it. They'd have to make choices about spending instead of just assuming I'd cover whatever they couldn't. 2 months after our confrontation, I got an unexpected visitor at my new apartment. I was enjoying my first real Saturday off in years, sleeping in, making pancakes, reading a book I'd bought for pleasure instead of necessity, when someone knocked on my door. It was Marcus. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, and was wearing clothes I recognized from high school. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. He looked around my apartment, really looked at it, and I could see the shock in his eyes. "This is really nice," he said. "It's what I can afford when I'm not supporting 3 other people," I said, not unkindly but not warmly either. He sat down on my couch and put his head in his hands. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear to God, Jessica, I didn't know how much you were giving them. I thought you were just helping out occasionally, like when Dad's car broke down or whatever. I didn't know you were paying the mortgage. What did you think was happening?" I asked. "You never had a job, but somehow we never lost the house. You went to college, but somehow the bills got paid. Did you think money just appeared?" "I thought they were managing better than they were," he said. "They always acted like everything was fine. They never told me you were struggling." I sat down across from him. Despite everything, he was still my little brother. "What's going on, Marcus?" "I got a job," he said. "A real job at an insurance company. It's not what I wanted to do with my life, but I need money and I need to figure out how to be an actual adult." "That's good," I said. "I'm also moving out of state," he continued. "I got accepted to a graduate program in Colorado, and I'm going to take out loans to pay for it myself. I don't want their money anymore." I was surprised. "Why?" "Because I finally understand what they did to you," he said, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. "And I understand what I let them do. I lived off your work for 15 years and never even said thank you." We sat in silence for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm sorry I was so selfish. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. I'm sorry I let them use you to take care of me." It was the first real apology I'd gotten from anyone in my family, and it broke something open in my chest. "I know you didn't know," I said softly. "They lied to you too." "But I should have known," he said. "I should have asked questions. I should have wondered why I never had to worry about money when everyone else my age was struggling. I should have paid attention." He was right, but he was also young, and he'd been as manipulated as I had been. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing," he said quickly. "I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to apologize, and I wanted you to know that I'm going to make this right." "How?" "I'm going to pay you back," he said. "I calculated what I cost you over the years, tuition, living expenses, everything. It's about $45,000. I'm going to pay you back every penny, even if it takes me 20 years. I stared at him. This was more than I'd expected from anyone in my family. "You don't have to do that," I said. "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "You sacrificed your 20s for me. You lived in poverty so I could go to college. The least I can do is pay you back." He handed me a folded piece of paper. "That's a payment plan," he said. "I can afford $200 a month starting next month. More when I finish grad school and get a better job. I know it's not much, but it's what I can do right now." I looked at the paper. He'd calculated everything meticulously, including interest. He was serious about this. "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked. His face hardened. "I'm not speaking to them right now. They lied to me for my entire adult life. They let me think they were broke while they had $80,000 in savings. They turned me into a parasite and made me complicit in hurting you." I could see the anger and hurt in his eyes. He felt betrayed too, just in a different way. "They keep calling me," he continued, "saying I'm being unfair, that they did their best, that family should stick together. But I told them that family doesn't lie to each other for 15 years. I felt something I hadn't expected, pride in my little brother. He was finally growing up, finally taking responsibility, finally seeing the situation clearly. "I'm proud of you," I said. He started crying then, really crying, and I found myself hugging him for the first time in years. "I love you," he said. "I know I never said it before, but I love you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for what I let happen." After he left, I sat in my apartment thinking about forgiveness and family and what it means to start over. Marcus was trying to make amends, but my parents were still calling me dramatic and unfair. The difference was clear. Some people, when confronted with their mistakes, try to change. Others just try to justify them. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I'd been promoted at work, partly because I finally had the energy to focus on my career instead of constantly worrying about money. I'd started dating someone, a kind, generous man who couldn't believe my family had treated me like an ATM for 15 years. I'd taken my first real vacation in a decade, spending a week in California visiting friends I'd lost touch with during my years of endless work. I'd bought new clothes, joined a gym, and started therapy to work through the complicated feelings of guilt and liberation. Marcus had kept his word. He sent me $200 every month without fail, along with updates about his life. He was doing well in graduate school, had made friends, and was building a life based on his own efforts rather than my sacrifices. Our relationship was slowly healing. My parents, on the other hand, had not adapted well to their new reality. According to family gossip, they were struggling financially, not because they couldn't afford their lifestyle, but because they refused to adjust their expectations. They'd burned through most of their savings trying to maintain the standard of living I'd been funding, and they were bitter about having to make actual choices about their spending. They tried various tactics to get me back under their control. First came the guilt trips, long voicemails about how I was destroying the family, how they'd raised me better than this, how they couldn't understand where they'd gone wrong. When that didn't work, they tried anger, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful, threatening to cut me out of their will, as if I cared about an inheritance from people who'd already taken my financial future. Finally, they tried bargaining. They offered to reduce their expectations if I'd start helping them again, even just a little bit. They promised things would be different, that they'd be more appreciative, that they'd never take me for granted again. I didn't respond to any of it. The hardest part wasn't dealing with their manipulation, it was dealing with my own guilt. I'd been conditioned for so long to put their needs first that every time I spent money on myself, I felt a pang of anxiety. Every time I enjoyed something I bought with my own money, I heard their voices calling me selfish. Therapy helped. My therapist helped me understand that what I'd experienced was a form of financial abuse, that my family had groomed me from childhood to be their provider. She helped me see that my guilt was a trauma response, not a moral failing. You weren't responsible for your family's financial problems, she told me. You were a child who was taught that your worth depended on your usefulness. Breaking free from that pattern is one of the healthiest things you could do. I started setting boundaries in other areas of my life too. I stopped working excessive overtime unless I genuinely wanted to. I started saying no to social obligations that felt like duties rather than pleasures. I began to understand the difference between being helpful and being used. The most surprising change was how other people responded to me. Friends I'd lost touch with started reaching out, saying I seemed happier, more confident, more like myself. Coworkers commented on how much more engaged I was at work. Even strangers seemed to respond to me differently. I carried myself with a confidence I'd never had before. I realized that for 15 years I'd been living my life in service to other people's dreams while putting my own on hold. I'd been so focused on being the responsible one that I'd forgotten what I actually wanted from life. Now I was finally free to figure that out. I started taking painting classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I joined a hiking group and discovered a love for the outdoors. I began planning a trip to Europe, something that had been an impossible dream when I was sending $1,500 a month to my parents. The most important change was internal. I stopped defining myself by how much I could give to others and started defining myself by who I was becoming. I was still generous, still caring, still helpful, but now I helped people who appreciated it, who reciprocated it, who saw me as a person rather than a resource. 8 months after cutting off my parents, I got a letter from my mom. Not a text or an email, but an actual handwritten letter. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something made me open it. It was different from all their previous attempts at contact. There was no manipulation, no guilt tripping, no anger. It was just an acknowledgement of what they'd done wrong, and an apology for how long it had taken them to understand it. She wrote about how they'd taken me for granted, how they'd rationalized their behavior by telling themselves I was happy to help. She wrote about how they'd built their lifestyle around my contributions without considering what I was giving up. She wrote about how calling me selfish had been the culmination of years of not seeing me clearly. We raised you to be selfless, she wrote, but we forgot to teach you that you matter too. We took your generosity and turned it into an obligation. We took your love and turned it into a transaction. We are sorry, and we understand if you never forgive us. It was the apology I'd needed, but it came too late to change anything fundamental between us. I wrote back a brief note acknowledging her apology but making it clear that I wasn't ready for a relationship with them yet, if ever. The truth was I'd built a life without them and it was a good life. I'd learned to value myself, to prioritize my own needs, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. I was finally living for myself, and it was the most liberating feeling in the world. This story taught me that love without boundaries isn't love, it's exploitation. For 15 years, I thought I was being a good daughter and sister by sacrificing everything for my family's comfort. But what I was really doing was enabling them to see me as a resource rather than a person. The hardest lesson was learning that saying no doesn't make you selfish, it makes you human. Setting boundaries doesn't destroy relationships, it shows you which relationships were real in the first place. I want anyone watching this who recognizes themselves in my story to know, you are not responsible for other people's financial problems, especially when those problems are really lifestyle choices. You are not obligated to sacrifice your future for people who won't sacrifice their present for you. Your dreams matter. Your financial security matters. Your happiness matters. And anyone who tells you otherwise isn't looking out for your best interests. They're looking out for their own. Which part of my story surprised you the most? Have you ever dealt with family members who saw you as an ATM rather than a person? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your strength and putting yourself first. You deserve to live your own life, not fund someone else's.